My name is Inaya툴라, and I appreciate your kind invitation to present on COVID-19 futures. I will focus on narratives, pivots, scenarios, and the long-term future. Let's begin. So first I want to map the narratives. Now what do I mean by narratives? The Financial Times during the global financial crisis said it's a crisis in search of a narrative. Meaning, what is it? In a world with uncertainty, we make meaning, we create meaning through story. Was the GFC a mortgage crisis, a global banking crisis, creative destruction that changes who are the winners, who are the losers? Or was it a geopolitical shift? Or is it a symptom of late capitalism? Or is it a possibility of eco-spiritual change? The meanings we give to reality contour what policies and strategies we create. We know very well narrative and policy are linked. If you use the word welfare, your chances of getting support for a social program drop by 40%. If you use words or phrases like assistance to the poor or caring for the poor, they jump up. During the Brexit campaign, even though the data and forecasts were very clear that this is financially ruinous, the narrative won out. The Prime Minister then said, it's not fair. What do? You take charge. They wanted control of their destiny, even if it led to possible poverty. Ivana Milovic has done considerable research on narrative and preparedness. Her conclusion is some narratives enhance preparedness towards pandemics and crises, some hurt. For example, the worldview of not me, not us can be transformed to all of us are vulnerable. Natural selection or all lives matter. Battlefield or complex adaptive system. The nation's organism or viruses know no country. Out of sight, out of mind versus all in this together. My favorite one is same storm, different boats. The policy suggestion is, how do we create global strategy? Moving away from Loja's work, I'd like to now broadly look at narrative learning and COVID-19. I divide this into three types of approaches. This is based on the South Asian episteme of Tama Raja Sattva, or restrictive, action, transformative. Fear and ego, action versus service and soul, people, planet, prosperity, and purpose. The first approach is blame someone. Don't take responsibility. It could be anyone. We know which leaders in the world are doing that, and the data has been very clear. They are failing miserably. The blame comes from a worldview, in this case, conspiracy theory or conspirituality. It's a perspective developed for political points by QAnon. It blames certain ethnicities, blames certain leaders, makes false links such as 5G and is the cause of COVID-19. We understand part of the issue is lack of scientific literacy. 1 in 4, in fact, believe the sun goes around the earth, says the National Science Foundation in the US. But it's not just lack of scientific literacy, it's powerlessness, a feeling, a perception that the world is leaving you behind. A more active approach is the hammer and the dance theory. Slow the spread so health systems can catch up. Ensure that the vulnerable are protected. We know nations that have done this. Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, and many others are doing really well. As we go further in action, we look for the cure. We create the vaccine. This means the development of global science, a coordination of projects, rapid sharing of information. But we need to be anticipatory as well. We have to watch out for the next disease. We know that part of the causative factors include city design and industrial meat production, wet markets. So we need to develop early warning systems to be future prepared. anticipatory systems with teeth that can in fact have enforcement. This is certainly the case with factory farming. What are some ways to transform this? Taken together, zoonotic diseases are responsible for an estimated 2.5 billion cases of human illness and 2.7 million deaths a year. We know that human encroachment on animal habitats risks more global pandemics. So what are some possible shifts? Perhaps we will move to seeing food as software, what's called the shift to cellular agriculture. The fifth discourse is that this is a financial crisis as well. We need to rethink the global economy, keep the money rolling. Universal basic income, universal basic assets, protection for the vulnerable. It's not just about more growth, but about enhancing equity. Thus, structural changes are in order. We may be working 4 days a week. We have to become far more flexible in how we work, where we work, and when we work. And we start to imagine global cooperative co-ops, big pharma as co-ops. As we move further, we have to understand it's not just about pandemics, but climate change. Is this a learning opportunity for the next crisis? We've seen where there's been lockdowns, pollution has dropped. The lesson there is we can create a greener planet if we put our mind and policies in that direction. The novelist Arundhati Roy goes further and suggests it's a portal to planetary awakening. Inner awakening, the great pause, meditation, prayer, mindfulness, and external awakening, challenging the old dogmas. Singapore, which was successful in the beginning in terms of combating COVID-19, forgot about migrant workers, meaning it was not inclusive. Thus the awakening is inclusion, inner and outer. This means a new humanistic polity in the language of Sri P.R. Sarkar, framing our identity as planetary with nature and technology, not in terms of nation state. So these are the narratives that are defining what's possible. We can be focused on blame, create action strategies, or transformative strategies. What then are the futures? Well, future one, if we get it wrong, we stay in blame, is a zombie apocalypse. This is group against group. Senses that we can't control the future. The future feels horrifying. This is what's called how people imagine the worst. New viruses on the way. The virus that emerge also mutate. Capitalism crashes. The second one, as mentioned earlier, is the needed pause. Scenario 2, we slow down to speed up. Connection to self, to nature, to family, to spirit. It's an inner awakening. As the head of Twitter said, to enhance this connection, you can work from home. People don't want to commute all the time. For many groups, working from home enhances productivity. Certainly, it can enhance well-being. This is the needed pause. Rethinking skills for workers, returning to life in the village, challenging pollution. This could lead to the global health awakening, a world of planet, prosperity, purpose, and humanity, moving from GDP to well-being. This is called the 5P revolution. Prevention, personalized health, precision health, partnership, participation. We know you'll be healthier if you participate in your health journey. We know society is healthier if there's partnerships of research, private business, communities, self, government. We know precision medicine is focused on you and the parts of you that need healing. Personalized is on your story, your life journey, your healing journey. And of course, prevention, ensuring that there's a fence at the top of the hill instead of an ambulance at the bottom of the hill. But if we get it wrong, if we don't make this transition, we could have the great despair. Economic crisis after economic crisis, nations all around the world fracturing, breaking up, and tribal war starting. This is hope that kills. Innovation starts and then fails. Wealthy protect themselves by creating their own health zones. There's massive unemployment that does not go away, as the new technologies that emerge do not need workers. We're already seeing suicide and depression and domestic violence becoming the new normal. Will this continue for the next decade? So we have narratives and we have scenarios. Are there some weak signals, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, that point or promise to some alternatives? In my work, I've seen 7. One is the pivot to wiser. Tan Sri Zul at the International University in Malaysia suggests we're overly westernized, overly economic-centric, overly industry-led, overly reputation-based, dehumanizing. We need to shift to wiser. Work in the government of New Zealand, they've been working on the shift from GDP to well-being. Their infrastructure planning intends to be well-being based. As they say, this creates a society in which the mana of yourself is enhanced by lifting the mana of others. The key strategy is community prevention as an infrastructure design strategy. The third pivot is to the city brain. Work throughout Southeast Asia suggests we create the anticipatory city. This city looks at emerging congestion, pollution, suicide, as well as health, well-being, and even transcendence. It sensors everywhere to help create a new image, a new possibility of what cities can be like. Cleaner, greener, safer, participatory, inclusive. The fourth is the shift from centralized fossil fuel energy systems to distributed energy systems. We've done research and workshops, for example in Malaysia, but other nations as well, trying to imagine a world where everyone has solar. Instead of 5G towers, it's street furniture. We use blockchain for distributed information systems. This has been called the Energy Genie, real-time information on your energy needs today and tomorrow. Work throughout the region from the United Nations suggests there's a pivot towards deep sustainability, a greener, a fair, and more resilient region. To move from my air to our air, we need enforceable regional agreements by 2040. First is a worldview shift. Is it just the air I breathe? No, this is the air we breathe. Air, like viruses, do not stop at nation states. We need climate action throughout the region, and we need to protect our eco-health systems. As a narrative, this is shifting from the king of plastic to Asia becoming the garden of well-being. The sixth shift is the pivot towards inclusion. We know inclusion leads to higher economic productivity. Hundreds of $billions in gains as females are included in the workforce. And with one scientific group, they suggested the problem was too many white buildings with white coats and white labs. They had to become far more inclusive to really make a difference. Diversity of funding, diversity of thinking, and diversity of people. This message comes across in every nation throughout the region. In one project with the UN, they suggested that, in fact, the key to economic revitalization is including the informal through platform co-ops using artificial intelligence. Those on the streets would have real-time information on prices, on climate, on crises. They could match everyone. So it was the informal using new technologies and entering the formal for safety and security that would enhance productivity. This is the notion of a team of 5 million, as the New Zealand Prime Minister has suggested. All policy needs to be rapid, science-based, early, decisive, inclusion, and has a story called A Team of 5 Million. Can we imagine the entire region being a team? And the final pivot is the pivot towards the inner. We know studies show very clearly that meditation and mindfulness reduce hospital resource use. Given the health costs are likely to increase from pandemics as well as aging, we need ways to reduce these costs. Meditation is one of the best ways to reduce cost. Studies show infectious diseases drop, elderly live longer, heart disease drops, tumors drops. Thus, there's 7 possible pivots towards a different future for the Asia-Pacific region. Away from weird, towards the wiser, towards well-being, towards the anticipatory city, towards distributed energy information systems, peer-to-peer energy systems, towards deep sustainability, towards inclusion, and toward the inner. Said differently, this is nature, technology, and humans in co-evolution, learning, working together, and consciously evolving. Now, which future will it be? We don't know. Which narrative will win out? We don't know. But we can certainly say, here's the narratives that create a better future for the region. Here's the narratives that lead to greater inclusion, greater wealth. But there's decisions to be made. If you remember the words of Yang Chu, isn't it here that you take a half step wrong and wake up 1,000 miles astray? We could go towards the zombie apocalypse and the great despair, or the needed pause and the global health transformation. So what are some of these alternate futures? One is the use future. We keep on doing things the way we've been doing them. We encroach in wildlife. We continue wet markets. We continue designing cities as the way we've been doing them for decades. Second is the feared future. Asia has risen remarkably. Will it now slide down as crisis after crisis hits us? Third is the fractured future. We know the geopolitical fault line throughout the region. We all know what they are. Will there be a soft transition to greater Asian identity? An Asian confederation of sorts, or will it be fractured with 30, 40 years, the long war of this century? So can we begin to imagine scenario 4, the Asian confederation, a fusion, nature, humans, technology, learning from the past, creating a novel future. This is the quadruple bottom line: prosperity, people, planet, and spirit. So in conclusion, what's next? In the long run, I believe evolution favors the efficient. In a conversation with the brilliant physicist Marsland Ottman, she suggested, when I asked her, can you tell me the next 100 years, the next 1,000 years, can the next 10,000 years? She says, remember, evolution favors the efficient. So what does that mean practically? The nation state will likely disappear because it is inefficient in allocating identity. In humanism, identity, nature, self, spirit is far more efficient. Capitalism is inefficient in allocating resources for all. There's no maxi, there's no mini, the money does not flow. Patriarchy is inefficient in allocating identity, wealth, and purpose, as is the exclusion of productivity. Religionism is inefficient in allocating community, as someone is always excluded and thus to be shunned or eliminated. Materialism is inefficient in allocating purpose and joy. Thus spirituality is the way forward, purpose with bliss. In the long run, we'll see a dramatically different region. Who will create this? The philosopher Sri P.R. Sarkar says it's the exceptions. One of the most important factors on the path to movement is the exception. The values of these exceptions, such as with the Buddha, should never be underestimated. They, the exceptions, construct something new. They are on the leading edge. They create the novel future. In our imagination from our book, Asia 2038, we imagine the new technologies with gender cooperation, using the new energy systems, remembering tradition, moving Asia in a direction of transformation. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.